I might be a little early to this, but we're chatting about everything I've knit in 2023 part 2. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel by bymwu. I'm bymwu, aka Marianne, and like I mentioned earlier, today we are chatting about everything that I've knit in 2023 part 2. The part 2 is kind of because I filmed the first half of this back in maybe June, July-ish, and I recapped the first 6 months of my 2023 knitting in that video. Even though there's still a couple weeks left of December, I figured I might as well just talk about everything that I've knit so far because my work in progresses are at a point where I'm not 100% sure if they will be finished this year and in which they will be part of next year's video. I guess there's maybe like a handful that might be finished. I might just throw them at the end as a here's what I've been working on section, just to kind of give a more holistic view. If you're interested in seeing what I did in that first 6 months, I will link that video up above somewhere as well as in the description below. I'm gonna structure this in a similar way as I did last time, which I'll run through the months and talk about completed objects in the order of completion. The order in which some of these finished objects show up might be a little different than what I've like presented them in the past, and that's because I might have started one like way in advance but didn't finish it up until recently or vice versa. In the instance that I don't have the object anymore because it was a gift or something, I will try to insert a photo if I have one. My last kind of note slash disclaimer is just because I've knit this much this year doesn't mean that you have to feel obligated to knit this fast or this productively. I'm knitting purely because I love knitting and I find a lot of peace in the process, and so knit at your pace. Take these as inspiration if you want. Click out if you find that this is overwhelming. I am here to support you in your knitting journey, whatever shape that looks like, even if it doesn't look like mine. With that all out of the way, let's get into all the projects. Bringing it back to the summertime, the first finished object that I have is the one that I'm wearing today. This is my Friday tee by PetiteKnit, and I absolutely adore this. I remember filming part 1 and this being on the needles. I think I actually casted it off maybe like a week or so after that video went live, and so it was like just on the cusp of not making it into that one. And this was one that I actually started back in like May because I brought it on like my May long weekend trip, and I didn't finish it until like the first week or so of July. The PetiteKnit's Friday tee is this really beautiful striped raglan broken rib shirt. I honestly like adore it so much. It wears so beautifully. It's very classic looking. I love the stripe colors. It has like a pretty wide raglan too, if you can see that like change in direction there, and I think it just looks so nicely. I knit this up in the recommended yarn, which was Sandnes Garn Sunday. I used Almond, which is like this off-white color, held with dusty moss green. At the time of knitting this, this was my very first PetiteKnit pattern, and I had a really great experience, which I find that her patterns are sometimes hit or miss. They either go really smoothly or there's like some kind of friction in them that I can't really describe, which I will talk about more later on, as you'll see. But this one went really nicely. I really enjoyed the way it was laid out. It made a lot of sense. It was really fun to knit up. The broken rib was just the right amount of like texture and complexity that it was like a little more interesting than just stockinette, but you could like take it on the go and not have to worry about messing up a cable or something. One thing that I would change if I was to do it again would make the sleeves a little bit longer. I was originally going for like a 3/4 length as per her sample photos, but I ultimately cut them off a little bit shorter, but I still think it worked out really nicely. I just think it would have been maybe more what I was envisioning if I had gone a little bit longer. Another thing that I would add about the patterns that I actually learned a lot from this one. So as much as it was like a very simple structure being raglan, this was the first time that I did German short rows that it like made sense. Up until this point, I was kind of just following what the pattern told me and I would just do it, and I wasn't really like understanding what the German short row technique was. And so this one like clicked, I think, because it has very like distinct, this is a raglan section, these are the shoulders, this is the front, this is the back. It was kind of easier for me, at least mentally, to navigate between like, oh, I'm now entering this section, this is what the German short row is looking like here, etc., etc. I also learned how to do the folded collar with this shirt. She has you do a purl row at the fold so that it gives like this really nice clean edge. I used that later on, maybe unsuccessfully, but I really enjoyed how this one looked, and I feel like it sits really nicely. Just everything about this fit I love and adore, and it's like the perfect amount of baggy and comfortable. And I wear this all through the summer, even though it is 100% merino. I know a lot of people don't necessarily like that because merino is not necessarily the most breathable. Breathable is not the right word because it is a very breathable fabric. It's just very warm. I mean, it's wool. I know it's supposed to be temperature regulating, but at the end of the day, it skews warm versus like plant-based fiber or whatnot. 10 out of 10, recommend this pattern. Would knit it again if I didn't have a bajillion other patterns that I want to knit. And yeah, adored this so much. I wear it all the time. Completed object number 2 was Baby Bear Bonnet by Pernille Larsen. I don't have it anymore because I had gifted it for my nephew. It was kind of his welcome to earth side present. It was the first time I made the Baby Bear bonnet and I fell in love with this pattern. This specific hat was made with the Knitting for Olive Merino in the color Marzipan, held with Sandnes Garn's silk mohair, not the tin silk version. And it was left over from my Mauricia cardigan, or at the time my Mauricia cardigan was still in the works, so it wasn't left over, but it was yarn that I knew I wasn't gonna need. And I, like I said, fell in love with this pattern. This pattern has quickly become my go-to baby gift knit. It just knits up so quickly. It's so adorable. I've gone on and on about it in the past in other videos, and so I won't go into too much detail here, but I absolutely adored it, and that was the very first time that I knit it back in July. I knit this one, I think in the 3-month-old size so that he could wear it like closer into the winter months since he was born in the summertime, and I got a photo of him the other day and he's absolutely adorable in it, so I'm glad that's getting used. It's so sad that they grow out of these so quickly, but again, they're so quick to knit that I would knit another one in a heartbeat, and as you'll see in this video, I did knit a couple more. But yeah, love that pattern so much. Also can't recommend it enough. The last project of July was a camisole. So this one here was the camisole number 9 by My Favorite Things Knitwear, and it's this really simple kind of structured camisole that just has this really beautiful folded rib detailing on the neckband as well as around the armholes. This one was kind of a spontaneous cast on for me at the time. I think when I did it, it was a week old of a pattern. Like she had just released it. I saw a photo of it on Instagram and was like, yes. It reminded me of just like tank tops that you used to get at the store that are just staples in a lot of people's wardrobes that you wear under shirts or even by themselves, and I just fell in love. And I had this Knitting for Olive cotton merino in the color Oatmeal staved up for a different camisole that I pivoted and made this. Despite this one being on 3mm needles, I recall it going very quickly, and I remember being very relieved at the time when it didn't have sleeves, because by the time you finish the body, you're just doing the edge work and then you're done. Like, camisoles are so nice as like a palette cleanser without being like an accessory. While I really enjoyed knitting this camisole up, I do have some like quirks about it, and I think it's less so about the pattern, more so just learning about myself through this process. Number 1 is that I don't actually like to wear camisoles because I'm such a cold person, evident of wearing like merino in the middle of summer. I don't gravitate towards tank tops because I find that I get cold in them, and then if I'm wearing them under like a cardigan or something, I don't know, that feels more spring than summertime. Like I'd rather just wear a t-shirt and just call it a day. And so I don't reach for this very often. On top of that, while I did use the Knitting for Olive cotton merino, it skews a little bit more cotton than merino if I'm not mistaken. I want to say it's like 60% cotton, 40% merino, something like that. Like slightly more cotton, and it's not as stretchy as I used to. So I think compounded with the fact that it's like a blended yarn, she has you do these really cool fold overs for the neckline and the shoulders, but in doing so I used the non-stretchy cotton merino and therefore these don't have a lot of give. I don't know if you can see that there. Like there's not much stretch at all, and maybe that's my own personal fault. Maybe I should have like bound it down a little looser or used maybe an elastic or something, but I think because of that, and same thing with the bottom edge, it doesn't like stretch at all. It's like very stiff. I don't find it very comfortable. It's kind of restricting, which is not what you want in a tank top if you're trying to go for that more airy vibe. Again, I don't think it's the pattern issue. I still would actually make another version. I'm a little more hesitant because I know I don't really gravitate towards tank tops, but I'm wondering if a merino version might fix one, the like stiffness of the bindings, as well as the like coldness of like a tank top, because yeah, I'm a very cold individual. I remember wearing this, like it was maybe like 25 degrees or something outside, and I was wearing this and I was cold while I was walking around the neighborhood. That probably explains why I don't really reach for this. Would still recommend this. I still love the way it looks, and yeah, I would consider making another one in merino. But again, I have so many patterns in mind that I want to do that it probably isn't on my top priority list. Moving into August. This is a little weird for me because I feel like August wasn't that long ago, but at the same time it also was a lot of time ago. I don't know. The first finished object here was my Musselburgh, my edition. This is the Musselburgh, I call it the Alaska edition because I knit this specifically on my Alaskan trip as kind of like that trip's project. So it has a lot of memories in it. I picked a really fun yarn, and I wear this a ton, especially now that it's cold. It's my go-to hat. I love the way it fits. I love this pattern, which you will also see later on. I've knit a couple more, and yeah. I had finished this in August despite casting it on in May, and I wouldn't change anything about it. This was my first time using a Canadian hand-dyed yarn, which was the Fireweed Fiber Co's Sweet Pea Sock yarn in the color Vineyard at Night or Vineyard at Nighttime, one of those names. And it's this really pretty purple with like blue, green flecks, some white in it, and the ever so often like pop of yellow. I don't know if you can see that there. There's a little bit of yellow there and some green. And I adored the yarn, the coloring. It did have a little bit of pooling around the crown. As you can see, it's like a little light here and dark here, but I like the way that it like turned out on the body of the hat, and I made the adult medium for myself. The Sweet Pea Sock yarn was a dream to work with. It's a 80% superwash merino, 20% nylon, and it's on the thicker end of fingering weight, especially compared to like knitting for all of Merino or Sandnes Garn's Sunday. It has only about, I want to say like 380 meters per 100 grams versus like some other sock yarns you can get like 400 plus meters, and it's so squishy and plush. It made a really beautiful hat. Again, adore it. I basically followed the pattern to the T. The only mods that I added was that I added a purl row here as well as like here at the, basically at the folds. And because the meterage was on the lower end, I ended up having to do the inside in a different color. I did the inside in Sandnes Garn's Sunday in the color Acorn, which was left over from my Ysolda summer top earlier in the year. And so it looks a little weird, but because it's a tube that you put the inside on the inside, it doesn't really show up when you do it. So I'm totally okay with that. I like the way it fits. I like the way it looks. Again, this is my go-to hat so far, and I am thinking about casting on another one, which is really funny because in my last podcast, I finished some Musselburghs that had been on the needle for a while. I was like, I think I'm not going to do another Musselburgh for a while. Yeah, I've already changed my mind, and I think I'm going to cast on another one in the new year. I want another one for myself in more of like a lighter color because this one's dark, and all of my winter jackets are like dark. I have a dark purple jacket and a dark like army green one, and while this goes really well with that palette, I feel like a little bit of brightness to that outfit would go really well. The mods that I did was inspired by this Friday tee in the folding collar. I don't really know how well it worked out because this first fold here works really well, but then to fold in on a purl, like, because the way the hat works is that you fold it in half for a tube, and then if you want a brim, you have to fold it up again. So then instead of folding like on itself, it's folding in on itself. Does that make sense? I don't think it like keeps that edge as nicely. And then because it's so thick, you don't get like as clean. You can see that it rolls over a little bit. But it doesn't really affect the way it wears. I think it adds a little bit of visual interest. Once it's on your head, you don't notice, but maybe if I was to do it again, I would just do a plain stockinette and not add that detailing in. The next finished object of August was a project that I had been working on for quite some time at that point, and it was the Sunny Baby Blanket by Lucie Stickler, I think is the designer's name. And it was a free kind of baby blanket that had these like, it was mostly garter stitch with like little patches of stockinette squares. It was really, really adorable. And if you guys had followed me for that journey, you know I had a hard time finishing that project. It was the project that taught me that I didn't like working with acrylic yarn on metal needles, and it took a lot out of me to finish that. I made this object for my manager who was expecting a baby girl at the time. She has now come into the world and is honestly probably like 4 or 5 months old at this point. But I was hoping to get it to her before she went on mat leave. She kind of went on mat leave unexpectedly because of an early arrival, and I didn't end up giving it to her until a little while later. But it was this really pretty gold yellow colored blanket that, despite the knitting process, I really, really liked the final object. That specific one, I was using the Loops and Thread Impeccable yarn in the color gold. And while it is a really nice yarn for being 100% acrylic, I just think it was a little squeakier than I was used to, and definitely not fun to work on metal needles because it was pretty slippery and then the needles didn't help. So I kudos the podcast to helping me finish that, because I think without the determination of wanting to show you guys that finished object, I probably would have like not worked on it for a very long time, and it might not be finished up until this day. Nothing but good comments about that pattern. It's a really simple repeat. I end up kind of fibbing it a little bit because I was like, oh, I could get away with fewer garter stitches in between each like square repeat, which ended up nipping me in the butt later on because it wasn't a square, it was more like a rectangle shape, and I had to accommodate by doing like an extra repeat. So while it was supposed to be like 10 squares by 10 squares, it ended up being like 10 by 11 or something. I don't think it changed the overall usage of the product. It was just one of those, like, I was trying to be sneaky about like cutting out some like extra rows of garter stitch, but in turn I ended up making it a little bit harder for myself. But needless to say, I'm happy that that is completed now and getting some love. Completed object number 3 of August is one that I actually also don't have, and it was because it was a gift knit for my nephew for his birthday present. It was a little knit vest in the Sandnes Garn Pure Gynt in the color dark green or forest green, something like that. And the yarn on that project had a very funny backstory. I actually originally bought it hoping to make Ryan a green hat, and I had casted it on. I was probably midway through that project, and I was talking to my mom one day while working on it, and she was like, oh, what are you working on? And I mentioned I was making this green hat for Ryan, and she was like, you cannot do that. You have to frock it, because in Chinese tradition, that is the sign of adultery. And needless to say, I had never heard of it up until that point, but that hat got frogged pretty quickly after. And so I ended up repurposing it into this little knit vest for my nephew for his birthday. I don't actually know if he wears it. Pure Gynt is a little itchy, and now he's a little bit bigger. I think at the time it fit pretty well, not snugly, but it didn't have like a lot of room. And I actually don't know what happened to it, because I think he wore it a little bit when I had gifted to him at his party, and he kept like scratching his neck because I think it was bothering him, and so we took it off, and I haven't seen him in it since. And I'm not offended. It was definitely one of those I'm trying to use up the yarn projects, and I didn't have enough to make like a big sweater, and I didn't want to buy more, and so I settled for a 3-year-old size sweater instead, or sweater vest instead. The knit vest pattern that I used was the 6-stitch plait unisex vest for kids by Ratchet On Chambers. I'm looking at my notes, sorry, it's a long title that I can never remember. And it originally has like cable detailing along the edges that I omitted because I wasn't ready to do cables. In retrospect, it would have been pretty simple because now that I'm in like my full cable era, I got that nailed down. But at the time I was like, I'm not doing that. So yeah, I knit that up. It was a free pattern, went pretty easily. The pickup stitch rate at the like vest section or the neck hole section was a little strange. I did it based off the pattern originally and it was way too tight, so I ended up just like ripping that out and picking up every stitch that I did to have like a stretchier head hole. That was the only mod that I did for that, besides the removal of the cables. But it turned out really cute. Whether or not he wears it, I don't know. But again, I think it was definitely more of a, I'm trying to use up yarn than really a gift knit. Is that bad? Sometimes it just happens. That was a yarn use up project for full transparency. I think I told my sister about it and she's like, yeah, that's fine. Sometimes that's just how the cookie crumbles. Something I learned about that project though was that I really did like working with the Sandnes Garn Pure Gynt. It's just like a really nice yarn that's got a little bit of a rustic vibe to it without being totally itchy. It is still a little bit more itchy, as evident by maybe my nephew not really wearing that vest, but I think for myself, who's not very inch sensitive, I definitely want to work with that yarn again. August is clearly a very busy month because I have 2 more finished objects too. So this one here is my Summer Souffle by Vert.And.Rose, and I love this. In retrospect, this one kind of like has the same shape as my Friday tee. It's kind of got like a boxier fit top with longer than just like traditional like shoulder capped sleeves, and I love this one. I've been dreaming about making another one without the frill for forever, and I almost bought yarn to do it, but I ended up removing it because I was like, let's work on some other projects in the meantime. But I definitely think I'm going to come back and knit a version of this shirt without the frill. So like I said, this is the Summer Souffle by Vert.And.Rose. It's just a plain circular yoke kind of boxy tee with this really pretty and dainty ruffle detailing on it. I had such an amazing time knitting it. It's knit on DK weight yarn, so it knits up fairly quickly, and this was kind of my goodbye summer knit. I did it in pink in honor of Barbie summer, and I've worn it a lot since then. It wears really nicely. The fabric that I created with the Katia Cotton Yak drapes really beautifully. This was kind of like everything I wanted in a summer shirt and then some. So far, this Katia Cotton Yak is probably my favorite summer fiber I've ever worked with. And I don't know, just something about it, it's just so beautiful. It's a cotton merino yak blend, and it's just got the right amount of memory with the right amount of like airiness from the cotton. It's just everything that I want in a summer fiber without being too warm or too cold. And I could go on and gush about this for forever. This probably kicked off my love for frills. I ended up doing another sweater later on with a frill, and anytime I see a frill pattern, I'm like, oh, I really like that. But the thing about the frill is that because it goes over the shoulders here, it makes this very hard to wear under under cardigans. So I kind of only like wearing this shirt like as is by itself, which makes it harder to wear in like the colder months because it's still more of a summer fabric. And so in like now when it's like -10 outside or even colder, I don't want to just have my sleeves hanging out, even though I'm wearing this right now. This merino shirt is actually pretty warm. So one thing that I hated about the process, which is not anything to do with the designer and it's just about like the knit process of doing it, is making the frill was it was a pain in the butt. I had a lot of trouble because you have it anchored to like the number of stitches are on the actual like bust, and because you're rapidly increasing to get this kind of like loopiness going, you're balancing between like the weird tension on the fact that it's like constrained on the actual shirt, but like so many stitches on your needles. I got cut off because my memory card got filled, so we're back now. But yeah, as I was saying, making the frill was like a pain in the behind, and I was getting hand cramps, which I don't usually. I find that I take enough breaks in between knitting that I don't get too much hand strain, and I try to be cognizant of stretching or not. But yeah, it's so frustrating because you're at the tail end, you're like, the frill is the last thing that you need to work on for this shirt, and so you're so close to the end, but it's just so hard to make. But the end product is beautiful. I don't want to say that it's my favorite shirt, but honestly, it might be. I don't know. That's a big statement, but I feel like if you were to ask me, my default would be like this one. I really, really, really enjoy it. I really want to cast on the souffle, which I do have plans to do so in the future. I have yarn that is available for that. So the frill era is not over yet. Next up is the completed wild bead socks. Don't have them anymore because I have gifted them for Christmas. I originally was going to keep them for myself, but I found out from this process that I don't like wearing lace socks and super high cuff socks. So I'm a shorty plain kind of sock lady. Not plain, but like cable's okay, or stockinette, just like I don't want holes in my socks. But the Wild Bee socks are a pair of lace socks by Helen Stewart, and I knit them up in the Sweet Sparrow sock yarn Nuthatch base in the color Butterbeer. I think it was part of her Harry Potter line, I'm not sure. My sister gave me this sock yarn as a present like a couple years ago that I've been hoarding and waiting for like the right project to do it, and the bees on that sock pattern kind of look like golden snitches, and so I kind of emulated the Harry Potter theme through that. My key takeaway about this project is that I absolutely love the way Helen Stewart writes her sock patterns. I was told that it isn't only just her sock pattern, she does it for her other garments too, but in essence she has it written in like text form as a normal pattern would, but she also has it written in a chart form with like progress, like percentages on it. So it's really easy to follow, especially if you're like more of a tangible person and you like crossing off the stuff you've been working on and seeing the progress that you've been making. And for someone like myself who's like a willy-nilly sock knitter, my socks are sisters, not twins. I kind of knit them however I think would work in my head. It's helped me make my socks more symmetrical, which was really necessary given that they were a pattern sock. The learning experience for that one was probably not going to really work on lace socks moving forward, at least not for myself, because I just really didn't think I was going to wear them. I'm just a very cold human being, and my feet are always cold as well, and the holes in the socks don't help. I want the warmth to stay in, you know? I'm like definitely the socks and Birkenstock kind of person, not because it's like a fashion statement, but purely because my feet just get too cold. Moving into September, oh my gosh, this video is going to be so long. The first project was probably the project that has the record of being my longest work in progress. And if you guys follow me in my podcast, you would know that that goes to the Maricia cardigan. This cardigan by Vert.And.Rose is a really beautiful faux cabled detail cardigan. As you can see here, it kind of has like this cable vibe, all fake. It's just done with like passing over stitches, and while love the finished product, had a really hard time working on this one. This project I took away as a learning experience because it taught me the importance of matching your materials to the project that you're working on. Similarly to the Sunny Baby blanket that I was making for my manager with the combination of acrylic and metal, this one taught me that with mohair or just knitting flat back and forth, you need to have like the just right length of cable, because I originally was doing this on like the longest cable needle that I had, and so the project was like sliding around constantly, and it was really, really, really hard on my hands, and hence gave for a really bad knitting experience. Before I jump into that, I mentioned the yarn already. This is the same yarn that I did for that baby bear bonnet, which was the Knitting for Olive Merino and Marzipan, and the Sandnes Garn Silk Mohair in 1015. Love the way it looked. It's like this really pretty off-white cream color. It comes off a little brighter in camera, but it's kind of got like I want to say like a gray undertone, but in like a really nice way. Besides the fact that I had a kind of weird knitting experience, really like the product, really like the fiber. I will say though, I think because of my poor selection of like materials for the needles, I had a looser gauge than I would have liked. And hence I think the shirt or the cardigan turned out to be a little bigger than I was originally expecting. If you want more details about this, I go on about it in podcast number 3 and 4, I believe. Honestly, it shows up in quite a few because, again, it was on the needles for like 7 months. Albeit, a lot of that 7 months was actually not working on it because I started it back in March and then was like, I don't want to work on this anymore because it's summertime and I don't want to work on mohair. And then it ended up coming back because I was like, I should work on it, and then it deteriorated. I had a roller coaster. And then completed it, and now I wear it all the time at work because it's super cozy and it looks great. Honestly, it looks really great. In retrospect, if I was to do this again, I don't know if I would make a mohair version. I know that Knits by Mandy made a version where she held the Knitting for Olive Merino double, and that one looks so nice. I think it gives a really like plushy kind of cardigan texture without the fuzziness. There's a time and a place for mohair. I think overall I'm not a mohair lover. I don't hate it, but every time I use it, it's just like not my favorite texture. I kind of like the no mohair look a little bit better. The next finished object of September was the first of my Christmas gift knits. I was trying to get ahead of the curve. This was the only one that I really completed up until like November, and that was a pair of Sunday socks by PetiteKnit. I knit these in the Sandnes Garn Perfect, which is their DK weight sock yarn. I think it's an 80% superwash merino with a 20% nylon or something. And I don't have anything to really report about the project or the experience beside that. It went pretty smoothly. The yarn that I used, the specific color, which was wine print, I want to say, maybe I might be forgetting that. It's this like pinky magenta color. I originally got it thinking it was gonna be like a little bit more of like a tonal. It has like little brighter pieces with like darker pieces in it. Turns out it was self-striping. That was a pleasant surprise. I think it was fortunate that I was making socks with this though, because if I was doing a shirt, I think I would have been more kind of upset that the colors kind of, I don't know if it would stripe in a bigger like circumference, but needless to say, it created a really cute pair of pink reading socks that I ended up giving my director last week. I would definitely make the socks, the Sunday socks again, but I slowly started pivoting towards a different DK weight pattern for no particular reason other than I found it and was like, I want to knit these ones instead. I'll talk about that when we get to the November projects. The last project of September was another baby bear bonnet. I won't talk about this one because I've talked about it already. The only exception was that I knit this one in the Knitting for Olive cotton merino and soft silk mohair in Dusty Artichoke, which is this glorious green color. I love that color. During October, I think I need to pick up the pace here because this video is getting long and we're only in October. We still have all of November and part of December to go through. October kicked off with finishing my first test knit. This is the Lily Frill test knit. The frill is back. And I had the incredible experience of test knitting this for Camisole Designs, also known as Masami on Instagram. And this is made in the Drops Kid Silk Mohair in the color 37 North Sea. And it's this really pretty, like a blue spruce pine green that I adore. This color is having a moment for me because anytime I go to a yarn store, I'm like, I love that color. And then I'm like, I have to hold back or else everything is going to be in that color. I have a knitting process vlog about this, so I won't go into too much detail about it besides that I had a really great knitting experience. The final product is lovely. My only comment for my specific one is that you'll notice that my frill is a little different than the one in the sample, and that's because I kind of went ham with the increases. I think I read the pattern wrong at the time. I thought I was reading it right, but no, it was wrong because I was looking at her sample afterwards, as well as some of the other test knits, and the frill isn't as aggressive. But I think it's so whimsical. It gives me very like Christmas holiday spirit vibes. And so I am all for the crazy frill that I had here. This was my first time working with the Drops Kid Silk. I do find it a little more itchy relative to some of the other mohairs that I've worked in, and so take that as you will. I find that even though I wear like an undershirt under this, I sometimes still feel the itchiness. So if you want to hear more about my process and my experience and just kind of see how I went about doing this, I will link the process video above here or here, wherever it is, as well as in the description below. So you guys can check that one out. But yeah, my Lily Frill sweater. I love it. She has a tank top version too. I don't think it has the same name, but if you don't want a sweater version, and it's still mohair. So if you're like interested in a version basically of this without sleeves, she has a pattern available for that. October saw the start of some more gift knits. This one here is my very heavily modified Sophie scarf. I don't really know how to show this to you because in all the photos she has it like curled up as a little croissant, but I changed the dimensions of this one so it's not as cute looking. But it's basically a really long Sophie shawl scarf thing that I said looks like a Canada flag in my podcast. I still stand by that statement. It's kind of got a Canada flag vibe. But this one was knit in Sandnes Garn's Double Sunday in the color Dusty Rouge and Putty in the middle here. I followed the PetiteKnit's Sophie scarf like general structure and then went wild. I changed the increasing rate. I think I did every 8 rows. I then just like maintained a single width for a really long time because I wanted it to be more of a scarf than a shawl, if you know what I mean. I just felt like it was gonna fit the person I was gifting it to a little bit better versus like the tiny scarf. And then I didn't want the big like triangle shape of the shawl, plus I didn't have that pattern. And so this is kind of the finished product that I ended with. The funny story about this yarn is that I originally bought this Double Sunday as a Sunday. So when I ordered it from the yarn store, I was ordering Sunday, and I was actually gonna hold that as the pink stripes in this Friday tee. But when I got it, like the package, it was Double Sunday, even though it was labeled Sunday. It was really confusing. After a lot of back and forth, I ended up not returning it because it didn't seem worth to ship it back at the shipping rate that they were asking for. And so I kept it, and it was just sitting in my stash haunting me for the longest time because I only had 2 skeins, didn't know what to do with it, and like, I'm gonna make a Sophie shawl. But then I changed it, or Sophie scarf, sorry, and then I changed it into having this like white section because I wanted it to be longer. In retrospect, I would have done more of a stripe as opposed to this like color blocking flag vibe, but I think once it's on, it's kind of cute because you kind of get like the white and like the pink kind of like connected. I don't know. I think it's really cute. Really happy with it, all things considering. If you want to know the specific measurement details about this, I have all of the like lengths up until what point I changed colors and how much I did of each section in my Ravelry page, which I can link below. The seal slipover is the next one. This one is so funny because I worked on it for maybe 2 months, finished it, and then it was immediately stolen from me. I say stolen with quotes because like I semi-gave it to them expecting to get it back, and then they were just like, I'm keeping it now, which is totally fine. But basically this is a kind of pattern vest slipover, for lack of better words, that PetiteKnit published a while ago. And I saw it at the beginning of fall, maybe the end of summer, and was like, I knew I wanted to make it this kind of season. It's just a classic shaped slipover with some pearl bump detailing. More visually interesting than just a plain stockinette, but it's not like crazy over the top. Plus it was really easy to knit up because it's just like different placements of pearl stitches versus like actual cablings and twistings and stuff like that. This was probably, after all of the PetiteKnit patterns that I've worked on, the first time that I had a weird issue with the pattern. The way it was written was like, certain sections were kind of confusing, specifically about the joining in the round, because you work the back yoke first and the front yoke and then you join them together. But because the pattern is on like a X number of row repeats, I can't remember, I think it's like 6 or something. When you're joining, one is on like the 5th row, for example, and the back is on the 6th row. and she's kind of like join, and you're like, they don't match up. How I fixed it personally was that I just did an extra row on the front so that I brought that down to like the 6th row or whatever it was actually. So then when I joined together, it was on the same row. That's not a novel thing. That's what some of the people in the project pattern pages on Ravelry recommended. So it worked really well for me. If you are on the fence about it, I would just be cognizant about that part. I think if you're aware that it's going to happen, it's not that daunting. But if you're going in expecting it to be a very straightforward knit and you just followed it, you would get a little bit of a wonkiness at the join. I haven't really had a chance to wear it, so I can't really comment on the like wearability of it, because like I said, I finished it. I actually finished it, blocked it, and like right like the day it was drying, I was taking photos and my parents were coming to change their winter tires because they store it at my place. And my dad was like, I'm cold, so can I borrow a sweater or something? And I was like, I have this vest that's actually really big on me. It might fit you. And so he was like, sure. I gave it to him. Besides it being like a little shorter, he was like, I think it fits really well. So he took it for that day. And again, fully expected I was going to have it back because like it was cold that day and he didn't have like a sweater on. So he was like, I'm just going to borrow it. And then I get a text message a couple days later being like, yeah, I think I'm gonna keep it. And then a couple weeks after that, which I posted on my Instagram stories, I get a photo being like, my mom has stolen it now, which I saw her yesterday and she was wearing it. So this slipover seems to be in high demand. I'm glad it's getting used. I just find the whole experience really funny as opposed to like being angered or anything by it, because I just think it's hilarious that I haven't actually worn it. I wore it for photos and I have photos so I can put them here. But besides having them for photos, yeah, haven't worn it out. The yarn that I used was the same Perfect from Sandnes Garn as I did for the Sunday socks. And I talked about at the time of filming the podcast that it had a little bit more of an acrylic vibe that I liked. But all things considering, it wasn't that bad and it bloomed really nicely. It is a superwash merino, and so the fabric stretched a lot in a good way. I was actually really worried when I finished the sweater or the slipover that it was too short and like wide, but because the superwash has so much like stretch and relaxing to do when you block it, it actually stretched out really nicely. That I do wish I had it. Now that I don't have it, I want it more than when I did have it. It's like the heart wants what it can't have, you know? Now we're moving into the November section. Most of what I finished at the beginning of the month were gift knits that have been sent out, so I still don't have them. And we're getting more into the territory of recent podcasts, so if you want more details about these things, please check out my last couple videos. Otherwise, I'll just give you the quick like TLDW, too long didn't watch. But I started the month off by finishing a family set of Christmas socks based off the Thick Mist Socks by Summer Lee for my brother-in-law, my sister-in-law, as well as my nephew. And I did these in the Barocco Vintage DK yarn and Douglas Fern and Ochre. I think it were the two colors. And they turned out so beautifully. I knit just the plain stockinette pattern from the Thick Mist socks. And I know this one has the option of doing like stockinette, scrappy stockinette, a cabled, as well as a reverse stockinette, and so I just stuck with the plain one, and I think they turned out really well. They sipped them over. I haven't confirmed if they fit, but they're kind of stretchy. I think it would be fine. But yeah, they were just really fun to knit up. I think in total it took me about a week and a half to do all 6 like individual socks, and while the smallest one you would think would be the fastest, because I decided to do like a striped version of the 2 solid big ones, I would say that the little one took me the longest, because micromanaging needles and yarn on a tiny sock is not that fun. But it turned out so adorable, and I'm really happy that I ended up knitting those up for them, because everybody needs warm feet for the winter time. This was the DK weight pattern that I said kind of replaced the Sunday socks. I think because the Thick Mist socks has like ranges from like large men socks to like the baby socks, it's kind of more versatile in that sense. Whereas I think PetiteKnit kind of only really looks at like adult sizing, and maybe only female adult sizing. I'm not entirely sure about that. The second finished object of November is another one that I don't have anymore, as it was a gift knit that I shipped out with the family sock set that I just talked about. And this was the Ingrid baby sweater by PetiteKnit for my nephew. I was a horrible documenter for this one. I don't have any process photos or final object photos of this one because by the time I finished it, I was so eager to send out the package that I blocked it, I like packaged it, and then I was like, oh shoot, I didn't take any photos. So I don't have anything to show you guys besides the final skein, which I don't know if it's as interesting, but this one was knit up in the Hayfield's Bonus Aran Tweed in the color Glencoe, which was an off-white colored yarn with brown and black flecks of tweed in it. It was a really pretty yarn, mostly acrylic. I bought it with the intention of it being a baby sweater, and so I wanted it to be something that was really easily maintainable. I don't know what about this pattern. I didn't enjoy it. I loved the final product, and if I was to like go out and buy it again, I would definitely buy this for another like baby in mind, but the pattern just wasn't fun to knit up. And this one, I can't even explain, like as with the seal slip over, I could say like, oh, there was some confusion in it. It wasn't that there was confusion in this, I just didn't enjoy the experience. I originally casted it on July in anticipation of giving it to my nephew for his like welcome to the Earthside birthday. But I ended up just kind of like leaving it and was like, okay, it's gonna be a Christmas present at this point. By the time I rolled around for Christmas, I still wasn't like really into it. It might have been the fact that it was like acrylic, and so it was a little bit more of like a rougher texture on the hands because acrylic's a little bit more like squeaky. I don't know. I wouldn't not recommend the pattern, but I definitely don't think I'm gonna personally ever knit the Ingrid sweater again. Maybe it would have been different in a merino or something like that, but ultimately I think there's so many other baby sweater options that I don't know if I would make this one in particular. It's a beautiful sweater, and I know a lot of people really like the PetiteKnit Ingrid collection, whether it's like the female adult one or the male adult one or like the baby or the junior one. But yeah, not for me. And so that was a very good experience to learn from, and I was told in a comment on my last podcast that I'm not the only one with that. So something about this pattern might have just been a little bit harder to understand maybe, I'm not sure. All right, my most recent finished garment is the next one up for November, and this one is the Step by Step sweater by Florence Miller. And I based mine very heavily off the coffee striped sweater version that Katie Does Knits did, which she basically did this exact striping pattern with the like lighter brown, darker brown, and this like oatmeal color in the middle. And I saw it and was like, I need that for myself. This one is knit in the Fisherman wool, and I picked this up when I was in Seattle back in June, and I love this yarn so much. I have been recommending it to anybody who will listen to me, with the important caveat that it is rustic, and so you need to plan accordingly. I would say that this is for like probably a thick sweater that you want, or something that's gonna stand the test of like wear and tear. Gives me cottage on the boat vibes. Definitely not for someone who is sensitive to wool, because it is rustic and it is itchy. It smells really good. It smells like lanolin, which I've been like obsessed with ever since I've like been able to like identify what that smell is. Apart from the itch factor, if you can get past that, I recommend it to everyone. It's a very affordable yarn. It's a very highly accessible yarn. I think you can get it in like just any Joann's in the States. In Canada, it's a little bit harder. I know that Amazon does sell it, and it's more expensive than if you were to buy it in the States. I think like on Amazon it's like $27 or $30 a skein, but you do get a pretty hefty skein. This whole sweater, I think, come down to it, I used 4 skeins because of the coloring, but in reality I probably only used like 2 full skeins of actual yarn quantity. I haven't weighed this to determine how much I actually have, so I could do that and put that in my Ravelry page. But if you're interested in making one for yourself, this is the color Oatmeal, the color Brown, and the colors Nature Brown. I really, really like this. This is a free pattern by Florence Miller. She has an accompanied tutorial on YouTube, and it was designed to be just a relatively quick knit for people. It's knit on 5.5mm needles on Aran weight yarn, so it goes fairly quickly, and I timed this one actually, and it took myself 21 hours to knit of active knitting time. So like anytime I was actually working on it is when I would actually time it. The exact breakdowns of like how long it took me to do each component, such as like the collar, the body, each of the individual sleeves, casting off, all that stuff is on my Ravelry page if you're really interested in like the specific details. But I think all things considering, it's probably going to be the fastest sweater I've ever made. Everything else seems to be taking a lot longer, which is totally okay. I'm in it for the process, but it was kind of interesting to know how long this one would be. The last two finished objects round off November and the December section, and they're both Musselburghs. So as I was telling you earlier, I love this sweat hat pattern, so much so that this year I've made 4. I've convinced my sister to make 2, and I can't stop talking about them. So I'll go over these 2 really quickly. I finished this one first in November at the very end. This is a gift knit for my father, and it is just a blue plain stockinette Musselburgh. It has this really fun marled texture on it because I used the Lanyards J-Wall Superwash 75-25 yarn. It's 75% merino, 25% nylon, and it just makes this really pretty like off-white blue color. I made his a little shorter because I don't think he likes having like a lot of like extra material up here. But this one's just a plain stockinette, knit up relatively quickly, besides the fact that I kept getting distracted by other projects. And I am excited to give this to him because while he stole my seal slipover, I can actually say I made him a gift knit. The next Musselburgh is the most recent finished object, and most recently completed object, whatever you want to say. And this is the Musselburgh Alpaca version number 2 for Ryan. This is kind of an extension story to part 1. So in part 1, I finished a hat that looked exactly like this in maybe May or June for part of an anniversary present for Ryan, and he wore it to Alaska. He really, really enjoyed it, and he got a lot of wear out of it. We had an unfortunate incident maybe back in like August, I want to say. It felted. For some reason it got into the wash and it just felted up, and it was so sad. He was devastated. I fortunately had enough leftover yarn to make him a second one, hence why we have 2 now. So everything about this hat is exactly the same as the original, minus the ribbing in the middle. So I opted to do ribbing in his version versus the other ones that I've shown. And the newest one, I did a twisted rib just so that it would be a little bit cleaner, because I found that in his old one, it was getting stretched out and I didn't like the way that it looked as much. The colors that we used here are burnt orange and brown from a local alpaca farm based in Deep River, Ontario, and they just have the softest, cutest yarn that I'm so thankful that I had enough to make 2, because now he gets his hat back. I still haven't decided what I want to do with this. I asked in the past what I should do when the felting incident originally happened, and people were telling me that it might not be a good baby hat because it doesn't have a lot of stretch anymore. I can't convince myself to cut it, but I do think mittens would be a good direction to go. It would be really warm too because it is felted, but for the time being, it's just kind of sitting in my office being sad because it's not getting love anymore. It's actually even too small. Like I can't even fit it over Jube's head, which if you don't know, Jube is my standard poodle. She has like a pretty small head, but kind of giving chef hat vibes. But yeah, I just have to block this one. I probably will steam block it, and then I will wrap it up and it will be his Christmas present. So those are all the completed objects that I've done in part 2 of 2023 so far. I'm gonna really quickly go over some projects that are currently work in progresses that I envision are on the trajectory of being finished in the next couple weeks, and so they would still technically classify, and then very quickly just go over what I'm working on. The first one here is the Turtle Dove Shawl by Sari Norland. If you guys are following her on Instagram, you would know that she's hosting a knit along for this, and I've kind of made it my like Advent of the year. I didn't buy Advent yarn or anything like on that sort, and so she's releasing it, a part of it every week until Christmas, and so I'm making a little version of it. I'm making a version of it in this really pretty bright red with some white tweedy flecks in it. I am adoring this so far. It's really therapeutic. It looks very complicated, but it's so addicting. She has it designed in a way that it's like really easy to follow, and I am obsessed. The specific yarn that I'm using for this is the Lamina Camo Tweed in the color 33T. Like I said, really pretty red with some white flecks. Kind of gives me peppermint candy vibes. And the trajectory, as long as I keep on track, is that this will be finished around Christmas time. We're on Clue 2, so there's 2 more weeks to let go. And at that point, I think I should be able to finish this in December. Again, as long as I stay on track and don't weave off of the path too much. The next one is one that I actually haven't talked about too much on the channel at all, and that is the Robinson Wrap Cardigan by Florence Miller. I have finished the body. Really, all I have left to do are the 2 sleeves and a little bit of the detailing, and so as long as I convince myself to cast on the sleeves sometime soon, I suspect this will be done. It's just a wrap top in mostly stockinette. Has this really pretty crossover detailing. It's really hard to show, but I am doing this in the Katina Merino Sita, which is it's a merino silk blend yarn in this like really pretty sage green color. The original plan for this yarn was actually to do the Maya Sodis cardigan by Sandries C, and I was full ready on casting that on back when I was planning my fall plan with me video, but I ended up deciding to pivot last minute because I had already purchased this pattern like quite a few months in advance, and they both have the same recommended yarn, which was the Knitting for Olive Merino held with a soft silk mohair. I did the conversion that the Merino Sita would be a perfect substitute for that yarn combination, and so I was like, you know what, I'll just do this instead of purchasing that new pattern. I still think I want to do that eventually, but now that I have this green cardigan, I don't know if I will do that anytime soon. But hopefully this one will be done by the end of the month. I think it's very contingent on the fact of if I can convince myself to cast the sleeves on. The last thing that I think is on the trajectory of being finished is another shawl. This one is one that I'm not even going to try to pronounce, so I'll put it on the screen here. But this is a free pattern by the designer known as Guri Peterson, and it's this shawl pattern with garter and ribbing detail on it, if you can see that. It kind of gives me scarf number 4 by My Favorite Things knitwear vibes, but instead of it going vertically on the shawl or scarf or whatever you want to call it, this one's coming in like on an angle this way, if that makes sense. I'm knitting this in leftover Knitting for Olive Merino in the Marzipan from my Mauricia cardigan. I overbought for that sweater way too much, and I'm really enjoying it. This was casted on as kind of like a just throw in my bag kind of go. It's not necessarily stockinette, but the patterning is so simple and the repeats are so intuitive that it's enough of a mindless knit for me that it was okay to just throw in. But also really enjoying that. I did do a mod on this one in the which that she originally has you cast on 7 stitches at the top and you work outwards from there, but I want it to be longer and a little narrower, so I think I cast it on 25 stitches or something like that to have the starting edge a little bit bigger. But this should be on the trajectory of finishing soon. I'm just going to go until I run out of yarn. I think we're about 2/3 of the way done, so hopefully those are all the trajectories for those ones. And then very, very quickly, and these ones are projects that I don't anticipate finishing this year, but I'm just gonna throw them in. I'm currently working on the Alder sweater by the Crea Bea, aka Rebecca Clow, and it's this really pretty colored work, kind of star-shaped raglan sweater that I adore. I'm knitting this in the West Spinner, I always get this wrong. I'm knitting this in the West Yorkshire Spinners Fleece Blueface DK, something like that. The name is so long that it's like always a mouthful. Really been enjoying this one. It makes such a squishy, fun fabric. And the very last project here is the Arctic Light sweater by Veronica Lindberg. I've been sitting at like just starting the yoke and the collar section for a while, but it's in this really pretty blue that I'm obsessed with. This one is knit up in the Derirum Natura's Penelope and Mezzanage, held with the Pascali's Mandalas Mohair in the color 214. I've done some changes on this one. I tried adding German short rows. I'm in the process of filming a process vlog for this one because it's my first time doing like a full-on cable sweater. And as you can see, the process has been slow going, and so I anticipate this will take me a while to finish. So that is everything I knit in 2023, at least since July. If you haven't checked out part 1, I will link it again above as well as in the description below if you want to see what I got up to in the first 6 months of this year. It was really fun for me to kind of like look back and see what I've knit on. I've surprisingly done a lot more gift knits than I realized. I'm sorry I don't have the final object to show you guys. At least I hope that they are out there in the world spreading joy. I had a really fun time reflecting and thinking about patterns, and I'm curious to see what 2024 has in store for me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you guys in the next one. Bye for now.